All right, welcome to the first of its kind, world-changing manufacturers network. Lisa Ryan has her ears to the ground and her heart in the game. Get ongoing education and new connections right here with Lisa and the Manufacturers Network. Buckle your seat, listen, and spread the word. Here's Lisa.
Hey, it's Lisa Ryan. Welcome to the Manufacturers Network podcast. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Jason Anthoine. Jason is a leading expert in internal communications and culture change with over 35 years of experience dedicated to transforming companies by reimagining employee experience and driven by the values instilled by his father's example. So, Jason, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lisa. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me.
So share with us a little bit about your background and what led you to doing what you do with your company.
Oh, that's great. I grew up in a very small town in Georgia, and my dad was a production line foreman at the school bus factory, Bluebird school buses. If you've ridden on one, my dad made those back in the day. And my mom was a secretary at the bank. And so every day they would come home and talk about what happened at work. And some of that stuff was good and some of that stuff was not good. But I was just soaking all that in for whatever reason. I guess I was a nerd. I was just fascinated with work, even at a young age. And I studied PR at college. And my very first job was doing the employee newsletter for a bank in Atlanta. And I've stayed in internal communications and employee communications the entire time that I've spent in my career. So 35 years, like you said earlier. So that's how I got into this. I love it. People spend so much time at work. They ought to like it and it ought to be worthwhile. And so I love the opportunity to work with different clients on helping to make that happen.
Awesome. We talk about company culture, workplace culture, employee experience. Why do you think in particular manufacturing companies have such a hard time reaching their frontline employees?
I think one of the reasons is that it's hard to, and it sounds like a simple answer. If you're not working in a manufacturing, you're not on a line, you're not digitally disconnected, then it's easy for them to reach you with emails and websites and intranets and all kinds of other things like that. It's harder to reach folks who are not digitally connected all day long. And it's an extra step. And sometimes, just like when we're trying to buy something ourselves in our home lives, one extra step might make it, we're just not going to try. So I think a lot of times it's just that it's so hard to do that, but it's so appreciated when you do. And a lot of times reaching those frontline employees, particularly in manufacturing, is about face-to-face conversations, whether that's at shift change or team huddles or whatever the venue might be there for that. But it's so critical and so important. And quite frankly, from a communications perspective, that face-to-face stuff is even more powerful than any of the intranets or emails or other sorts of things that tend to be digital like that. So I think it doesn't get done as often because it's hard, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be done because it has such a huge impact.
And so many times, because we're all so connected all the time, I'm always on the computer, always checking email or with my phone or whatever. But you have these deskless employees, and a lot of times it sounds like we assume that we're a lot more connected to them, and it's not the case. So that face-to-face certainly makes an impression.
Definitely so. And that's even true, even if you do give all of those employees access to email or the intranet, or even if you have a mobile app or something like that, or even digital signage in your facilities, particularly if you're relying on them to look at that when they're on a break or they're not at work and they're at home. I don't know. I don't like to spend a whole lot of time doing work when I'm not at work. And I think it's silly for us to expect those folks to do and think the same thing. Even when they are connected, it's hard to actually connect with them, not just to them. And I think face-to-face overcomes all of that.
So many manufacturing companies have a hard time attracting and retaining not just top talent that I talk about all the time, but even qualified talent for their skilled and less skilled frontline roles. So what are you seeing as far as really reimagining what organizations are doing to change that?
I think that, and some people think I'm a heretic when I say this, and probably some other things I'm going to say on this podcast, but I think that organizations have the turnover that they're willing to accept. And what I mean when I say that is that I work a lot with clients and they're like, oh gosh, we have so much turnover, particularly out here on the line and these particular jobs. We get people in here and for whatever reason, 90 days, 120 days later, they're out the door and they're off to doing something else. And they're like, that's just how it is. But if you talk with those employees, and I do a lot of talking with those employees, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So sometimes it's because they don't know enough about the organization and the culture. So that might mean interview and recruiting process might need some tweaking, or it might mean new employee orientation and onboarding might need some tweaking. Other times it's, all right, I've gone through all that. They've even given me the training. I'm out here day in, day out doing this. And let's pretend I'm on an assembly line. I don't know what happens 5 stations to the left of me or 5 stations to the right of me. So I don't have any context about the contribution I'm making, how valuable that is. What if I did it better? What happens if I did it worse? So there's a lot of, I think, opportunity there to explain, how employees are fitting into what we're trying to do as an organization, and particularly how critical their role is in doing that. That gives them, I think, some purpose with some context around it about the importance of their role and the job that we're trying to do as an organization and who our customers are that we're trying to please. And it just feels, based on conversations that I've had with tons of employees over the years, the more you can help connect them to their work, which they're incredibly good at usually and incredibly proud of always, connect that to the larger purpose for the organization and what we're trying to do for our customers. That seems to help a lot, because now I understand more than just exactly what I'm doing all day long. I can put it all into context. And I'm more likely to stay if I know I'm appreciated and I understand what my contribution is.
Yeah. And it's so easy to blame turnover on money. Oh, they're just leaving because they went somewhere else and got more money.
Right.
And that's so not the case. It's funny in my programs when I have people coming up to me at the end and they're like, you know what? I can't keep these people. Nothing I do. They're always leaving for more money. I can't find anybody who wants to work. What I want to do is look at them and say, oh, honey, they're leaving you. But
That's
I
right.
can't.
That's right. They are normally leaving the manager or the supervisor, which is something that could easily, not necessarily easily, but something that definitely can be addressed. And if you go on Glassdoor and some of these other job rating sites and things like that, people are always talking about why they left. And it is hardly ever mentioned that it was compensation. Yes, of course, but that's like in the top 10, maybe. It's certainly not in the top 5.
Exactly. So it seems to me that smaller manufacturing companies might have some advantage over the bigger ones when it comes to engaging their employees.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, what can the bigger companies learn from the smaller ones or vice versa?
That is such a great way to think about it, because over my career, I've worked with really large organizations like GE and Siemens. They're just big global behemoths. And then have worked with very small organizations where there might be 50 people in a tool and die shop. I think a big advantage that the smaller ones certainly have over the larger ones is that you can talk to everybody all at once if you want to, and in person. There's an opportunity for the CEO all the way down to the plant engineers to know all of the employees who are working there on both a professional and a personal level. And that helps to create stronger relationships. And that to me is certainly an advantage compared to larger companies where you might have a manufacturing site with 1,100 people in it. There's just no way you're going to be able to know everybody individually, except for maybe the frontline supervisor. So it's just really hard for folks, I think, to grasp that. And they usually use digital channels and platforms and things like that kind of as a substitute. And like we were talking about earlier, I can connect to these people, but that is not the same as connecting with them. And so I think that's where the smaller companies have an advantage. Now, for the bigger companies, the advantage they have is obviously their scale. So they've probably got some communications people and certainly some HR people who have responsibilities around communicating with all employees and helping leaders and managers be better at communicating with their employees. And so for those bigger ones who are doing that, I think those are really good lessons for the smaller organizations, which is if we're thinking about how the leaders in a larger organization are communicating with their employees, when we're working with them, we develop communication strategies for each leader. A lot of times you hear, particularly on LinkedIn and externally, that you need to have an external sort of thought leadership strategy. This is pretty much the same thing, but it's internally. So for each leader in the organization, how often are they going to have small group huddles? How often are they going to talk about the big company stuff and then all the KPIs and dashboards and things at the shift change meeting? So I think there's a way to think about how the bigger companies are doing it. It's not because they have more money, not because they have more scale, but they are doing their best to make that relationship and that interaction feel like what a small company can do. And so the smaller companies already have that advantage because they're smaller. So that's, I think, a nice page they can take out of that playbook around what is each manager and each leader going to do to help drive engagement and satisfaction and pride and all the other things that are on the dashboards everybody's looking at.
Even in the bigger companies, it's that employees don't necessarily expect them to know all 1,100 people who work there, but if they at least make an effort, at least they feel that they care and they do know their name, or they're able to stop by and just say, hey, how you doing, and stop by. Because when you're in upper leadership for an organization, your employees see you differently than just their coworkers. So I think in a big company especially, it means so much more, because a lot of times the hourly staff they're not bothered with. They're not really seen at that same level.
You're exactly right about that. And I think that management by walking around thing that's been around for decades has been around for decades because it's so powerful. You may be working in the front office, but you've got to get out there and talk with employees. There's so much literature and research around the fact that a lot of sort of leadership communications is symbolic. And so symbolically walking around and having conversations changes the dynamic in the relationship, and it strengthens that relationship, especially from the employee's point of view. You're taking the time to do that. You truly, genuinely care and want to know more. And the more you can demonstrate that, I think the more powerful it becomes over time, and it just snowballs and builds.
It's funny because these days you cannot read an article, you cannot go onto a website without somebody telling you that you have to engage your employees and do all this kind of stuff. And we have to have resources measuring it.
Yeah.
So when it comes to that, what does employee engagement mean to you? And really, why does it matter in real terms?
Oh, gosh. Earlier, I said that people think I'm a heretic when I say certain things, and this one in particular. I don't know what employee engagement is. What is it? If you go and ask somebody what it is, they'll give you their answer. And the next person will give you their answer. And the next person will give you their. There is no common understanding or definition for what engagement is. And for all of these companies who are selling employee engagement surveys, there's nothing wrong with employee engagement surveys. But each company that sells one has a different definition of engagement. Now, that's not true for blood pressure, right? So we know the medical definition of blood pressure and we know how to measure it. And then here's the number, and that number we all understand. That's not true with engagement. Like, there's no common definition of it. There's no common way to actually measure it. And then more importantly, there's no way to compare it across organizations. Some might say we've got an 80% engagement rate. And in another organization, that might actually be 40%. So there's no way to really define it or measure it in a common way that everybody agrees with or understands. And I think the other thing, and we see this a lot, is that human nature, employees are going to tell you probably what you want to hear on the engagement survey, mostly because, all right, if I tell them this, they'll leave me alone and I can just go back to doing my thing. I don't have to keep being worried by this stuff. So even if you are measuring it, and you should be, I think the results are suspect because there's just a lot of fudge factor in there that I don't think organizations take into account.
I know in a lot of my programs too, I talk about the fact that you can feel culture.
Mm,
So it's not something that you can actually measure if you're doing an engagement survey, but you walk through the plant and are employees smiling or laughing or at least looking up when you walk by, or
yeah,
are they head down, looking miserable, all of that kind of stuff. And every company is going to be different. What's engaged in one company, you can have two completely engaged companies and their employees and their attitudes look completely different because it's just that what they're in. I think as leaders, it's really getting to know your people, taking the time
yeah.
to care and truly care about them. And like you said earlier too, let them make sure that they feel valued and appreciated for the good work that they do.
Yeah, yeah, and I think too that they rely on that survey and they're like, okay, we got it back and it's 45 or 95 or whatever the number is. But they're also not looking at other numbers because I think engagement also shows up in safety incidents. It shows up in
Yeah,
on-time deliveries to customers. It shows up in all kinds of ways on the dashboards that people are already looking at. And those things by themselves, totally separate from an engagement survey, will start to give you some idea about how people truly are feeling about their work and if it really matters to them, because that's where it will start showing up first, particularly around turnover and calling in sick and different things like that. There's just different ways to look at it without necessarily having to do a big expensive engagement survey.
exactly. So I know one of the exercises you do with your manufacturing clients is something you call the what employees want focus groups. So how are these different from employee focus groups that companies may be already doing?
First of all, we in front of those employees, we try not to call them focus groups because
Okay.
that feels, oh gosh,
Spotlight.
I'm on a spotlight. Somebody's going to record me. I can't say what I want to say. Feels like a science experiment almost. And so what we try to do is have them be very casual, very conversational. We don't record anything, audio or video. We jot down some notes and some broad themes. We don't want to know your names. We don't have name tags. We just want you to feel totally comfortable to come in there and talk about whatever you want to talk about. Now, the reality is that a lot of companies do their own focus groups, and they should, and they're great. But like we talked about earlier, people are going to fudge a little bit because they don't want to tell you the truth, but they will tell us the truth, even if they know that we're going to go right back to the company and tell them what they said. They just don't want to be the ones to tell them that, but they're glad to
Right.
tell us that so that we can tell them that, which means they tend to be more open. They tend to be more conversational. And we tend to get a lot more really good nuggets of truly what they are looking for and aren't getting or would like to get that can make a difference when it comes to engagement or quality or process improvement or all the other things. And to me, the key, if you're not doing them, you should be doing them. And if you are to do it better, is to have somebody who's not you do it. Doesn't have to be me, but it has to be somebody because that's the only way anybody's truly going to be truthful about it.
And there also has to be a level of vulnerability with leadership that they are okay with whatever they hear. I always tell my audiences it's like poker face. You are whatever it says, your only response is thank you for sharing. Because if you fight, if you argue, if you justify, if you give any feedback,
Right.
then they are not going to feel safe
That's
of
right.
giving their real and if you're going to be doing these surveys, you got to find out the real story.
That's right. And so that's how we usually do these things is they've done an engagement survey or they've done something else. And then we'll come back and say, all right, you've got the rational responses to those surveys. Now let's get an emotional context around what people really mean when they said this one's a 3 or this one's a 2 or that one's a 4. Let's go and talk to people and ask them what they really mean about that. How do they feel about how they scored it that way? And you get a whole different level of honesty and transparency, especially the way we conduct these, which is no managers or supervisors in there. If we want manager or
Mm.
supervisor input, then we'll have separate manager and supervisor conversations. But in these conversations with employees, it's all peers so that they do feel even more open to telling us what's on their minds.
But I think the other thing that's really important in doing that, and I'm sure that you do it to some point, is to number one, get the feedback back to employees relatively quickly so they don't think it was a waste of breath.
Yes.
And also, number two, making sure that the managers have the resources and the tools to at least start to give employees some of what they want instead
Yes.
of, because I think employees, and you're probably finding that employees want a lot less than we think they do. They want to be
Yes.
listened, they want to be respected. There's little things that they want that can make their day a little bit more pleasant. But
Mhm.
you're not going to generally have people say, I want to work 3 days a week and make $150 an hour.
Who does it? Who does
I
it?
know we all would, but that's what we're afraid when we ask them what they
Right.
really want. It's no, that's not it.
Right. And that's such an important point, Lisa, because you said they want respect. They've got a lot of pride in what they do. They want to be, listened to, those kinds of things. If those things are happening, then that's when you might get the cherry on top request. It would be great if we had fried chicken in the cafeteria Tuesday and Thursday, but they're not going to lead with that if those other sort of foundational things aren't in place. So I agree with you. I don't think they have outrageous expectations. I just think the outrageous expectation is whatever it is I tell you, please tell me what everybody else said, and then please show me that you're doing something about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you could wave a magic wand and make things better for both the manufacturing companies and their employees, what would that look like?
Oh gosh, that's a hard one. In my mind, I'm picturing like the Disney Tinkerbell when she waves her wand. It's like these stars that are like fireworks that are coming out at the end of it. And to me, those stars and fireworks would be trust. Like, ding! I can just wave the wand and everybody trusts everybody. That wand doesn't exist, of course, but being able to build trust and create that does exist. And so you don't need that magic wand to wave trust so that you can have trust. You can start tomorrow building trust by getting to know your employees, letting them get to know you better, helping people understand that we're working together as a team and we all might have different roles and some people might sit or stand in different places in this building, but together we're trying to all do the same thing. And so the more we understand that collectively, the closer we're going to get to that. And almost every interaction that employees have with leaders and vice versa, that's an opportunity to put a deposit in the trust bank. Because just like at home, every now and then some bill's going to come in that's going to overdraw you, right? So the more deposits you can put in there, A, the more trust you're going to have, and B, the less likely you are to get overdrawn when a big check accidentally gets written and can't cover it. So I think any of those interactions are just prime opportunities to just keep putting deposits in that trust bank.
Absolutely. So if somebody is looking for ways to turn around their culture, what do you recommend is the best way to get started? Maybe their culture is not where they want it to be, or maybe it's super toxic or anything in between, but what's a good starting place?
A really good starting place is fairly simple, at least in my mind, and cheap. In fact, it's free. Just go and ask your employees what kind of culture they want. We get so many companies who come to us who say, I want this kind of culture. And the reality is that you already have a culture regardless of whether you've tried to have one. You just, when humans get together, that's just what naturally happens. And so you have a culture regardless of whether you've tried to have one or not. And so whatever that might be, if you want it to be slightly different, then you've got some ideas about what that is. And so do your employees. So the best way to figure that out is to work on that together. What do you want out of this organization from a culture standpoint? Here's what we think is important. What do you think is important? And just having that conversation begins to open up a door and open up a dialogue around what we want collectively and how to get there. You might need help at a certain point, and that's fine. You might not, but just starting that conversation automatically changes the culture immediately because it signals that it matters and that you care and that together we're going to work on this and figure out the right solution, just like we do every day with every product that goes out this door.
Yep. And speaking of conversations, if people would like to continue the conversation with you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
I've got a website. It's jasonanthoine.com. And then off of there, there's ways to get to me on LinkedIn. And there's also ways to get to my own podcast, which is Riding Shotgun with Jason Anthoine. So those are two great ways to continue that conversation. And then, of course, email and phone are right there on the website as well. I may be a consultant, but that doesn't mean the meter's running every time you have a question. If you've got a thorny issue and you just want to kick it around, reach out. Let's kick it around a little bit and see how you might think about it a little bit differently.
All right. Jason, it has been a pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining me.
I appreciate it, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
I'm Lisa Ryan, and this is the Manufacturers Network podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Manufacturers Network podcast. Do me a favor and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues so we can grow this network and connect more fantastic folks just like you. You can either send your buddies to the website at manufacturers-network.com or share the Manufacturers Network podcast on your LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or wherever you and your industry friends hang out. The bigger and faster we grow the network, the stronger and deeper the community we'll all have. Thanks again, and I appreciate you.